welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. With that, I want to get into some heavy topics here to cover today, so let's get into it. Why? I ask you why. Why is it that most of the crimes by illegals, and particularly Muslims, are sexual in nature? Well, you would have to go back to the man called Muhammad, who was a pedophile. You know, the so-called prophet the Islamists and Muslims worship. Well, first of all, even their own book claims he was a false prophet, and moreover, he never performed any miracles. Anyway, he was chased out of his own town as the folks there learned he was a fraud. He stole his adopted son's wife for himself. He had uncontrolled passions, and these perversions found their way into the Quran and the Hadith. The way their so-called religious book reads, a man could just nearly have relations with anything that moved. Believe me, I have close friends who, while guarding the prison camps in Iraq, saw it firsthand. And our servicemen serving in Afghanistan had to be trained to overlook the older men taking boys. And this is what the liberal leftist Democrats want to bring to America and fold into our culture. And they have, and they did under Biden. In my estimation, the destruction the Democrat left has brought upon America makes them worse than any ISIS member. I'd stand a better chance of converting an ISIS member than anyone on the pathologically demented Democrat left. Why? Having read a good part of the Quran, listened to scores of lectures, and done a comparative religious study, Islam is a total fraud. It is internally invalid and conflicted. The text is fanatical and admissions that are abundant. In fact, their original text was intentionally burned so it could be rewritten. It would be the easiest so-called faith to deconstruct, but for demonically influenced ideologues and atheists that comprise the Democrat left. In this country, 85 to 90% of those who convert to Islam leave it within 5 years. It's just that bad. Now, given that introduction, let me give you the consequences of Islam's sexual chaos, because we see it every day, and it seems like every time a crime is committed by that culture, it almost seems to be somewhat sexual in nature. And, you know, I tried to get my head around that. Why is that the case? So, commentator, lecturer, and debater on family values, Andrew Wilson, he brings up some very interesting information that I think is worthy of note. He slaughters the Islamic apologists who have been gaslighting the naive Christian West for years. Now, in one of his debates, Wilson took on an Islamic apologist and shredded him over the question of what religion is best for society. Let's first start with the definition of the word religion, which means the worship of a superhuman and controlling power or God. One thing we know about Islam is that Muhammad never performed any miracles, nor was he connected to any superhuman and powerful God. Wilson educated the audience on just one discrediting and demeaning and devaluing aspect of Islam with regard to their sexual practices and how that passion is really at the center of their so-called beliefs. Now, I preface this with the fact that there are some with whom I am friends who have escaped Islam or got away from the influences in their nation wherein they did not get caught up in the sexual perversions and are very smart people. But that is an extreme minority. And with that said, here are some of the disturbing facts. Wilson's studies in the data that he was quoting from revealed that Muslim interbreeding and incest has been occurring at a high rate within the Muslim population for about 1,400 years, since the earliest Islamic period, encompassing most of the land occupied by Islam today. It's spread from the 8th to the 15th century, moving into Persia, North Africa, and South Asia. The most common type of inbreeding is first cousin marriage. Even in comparison to regions occupied by Arab Christians, Muslims are staggeringly high. Islamic nations have an inbred population. For example, in Pakistan, there is inbreeding at about 65%. This produces incredibly low IQs. So this is the main point, the consequences. Christian country inbreeding is usually less than 1%. So maybe that gives you a glimpse as to why the Christian West and Christians in general build better societies. Christian inbreeding declines, as we saw from church intervention in Spain. Even in European nations where marrying your first cousin is legal, they don't do it because of the ecclesiology. The more Christian the nation, the lower the inbreeding and the higher the average IQ. The reason this is so important is that not only does inbreeding cause increased genetic defects from making recessive genes dominant, it impacts the intellect in a compounding fashion. With IQs at levels where there can be no managerial skills, nations and societies cannot thrive. In the sub-Saharan countries in Africa, we see they're all Muslim, 99% Muslim in Somalia, with a very high 60% first cousin marriages. Looking at Niger, 99% Muslim, with 60% first cousin marriages. And we are well below the 80 IQ. Everywhere Islam goes, the IQ collapses due to the inbreeding. Let's look at the causal link between cousin inbreeding and low IQ. There is an increased homozygosity for delirious recessive genes, and it is the strongest causal link for why the IQs are so low. Folks, there is a genetic risk that raises the chances of inheriting 2 copies of harmful recessive genes and its brain-developed impact, where the harmful gene can impair neurological development, reducing cognitive potential. As Wilson said, IQ reduction evidence reveals first cousin offspring lose 3 to 4 points of IQ. On average, closer inbreeding can cause larger deficits, and they've been doing it and at it for 1,400 years, folks. This is what I'd call the devil's biggest footprint in this world, is that religion. On top of it all, there is a generational compounding. So just to make the point, there is an exponential growth over a few generations where you lose a few more IQ points, and then generationally, you'll lose more and more and more and more. And it keeps going on. And they've been doing it for 1,400 years, folks. In reality, in some of these places, the cousin marriages are over 50%, and this is not even accounting for siblings and the second cousins and stuff like that. So what are the generational consequences of a low IQ? Well, it reveals that those with an 80 IQ versus a 100 IQ, the 100 IQ has a 50 to 70% lower welfare dependency, and the statistics are dramatic across the board in every category. And folks, we pay for this. And the Democrats want to just flood the country with these people. There is a real and immediate consequence to a departure from the truth. That is the truth of the Bible and the real faith and the real God. Here are other consequences with a lower IQ. The arrests are 8 times higher. Violent offenses are 4 to 6 times higher. Teen pregnancy, 3 times higher. Child neglect and abuse, 3 to 7 times higher. And generational poverty, 4 to 6 times higher. And most important, they are like dogs in heat, and the attitudes they have toward women, the women are basically property and fair game to a Muslim if they become aroused. After all, that is what they are taught, and that's what their religion teaches. Now, they'll deny it, they'll try to point to other things, but, the proof is in the pudding, and we're seeing what it is, and the statistics bear it out. Moreover, you have heard me say that one of the 3 major ways the Islamists say they will take us over is through outbreeding us, and they are, while the Democrat and what I call the demonic Democrats convinced you to abort over 65 million American workers. Yes, I do think we are under a judgment, one that's just and overdue, but I intend to let you know why as I connect the dots. There are consequences to your decisions, and America is paying dearly for them. Now, back to Islam. Almost every study available shows an IQ entering into the low 80s in Muslim countries, and it affects every aspect of life in a negative way, from economic prospects, criminal, mental, physical health, happiness metrics, and both at an individual and suicidal level. In fact, it shows that when a country has a sub-90 IQ average, they find it difficult to tap basic innovation, infrastructure, professional class, and other basic needs of a functional society. Are you connecting the dots yet? Is that sounding familiar? Now, modern society doesn't require everyone to be a genius, but they rely on the distribution of abilities, and you can see that in the roles that's being played, and particularly like between 75 and 85 IQ. These are basic jobs, the repetitive routine type labor jobs, and that is really Islam and the Islamic nations. So what does it actually take to create a functioning Western society? The job roles below 85 IQ are, as I said, the basic low-level and functioning jobs, practical skills, and routine labor, which is Islam. That's almost every Islamic nation. Now, come on, you certainly don't think they built those skyscrapers over in the Middle East, do you? 85 to 100 IQ would be skilled labor, administrative support. Between 100 and 115, that's where you enter the professional and middle management. 115 to 130, you have engineers, scientists, doctors, and specialized roles in things they desperately need that they get from the West. And then you have the 130 plus IQ, which is innovative leadership, high-functioning problem solving. So inbreeding itself over generations massively compounds that lead to negative consequences. The genetic defects increase as well in every single generation. Islam took an ethnic people that were at the heart of being the top of civilization, and through generations and inbreeding, it has turned them into the lowest IQ and some of the dumbest people on earth. And this really isn't being cruel. This is just being factual and truthful. To steal and paraphrase a political phrase from the old Clinton campaign in the 90s, it's the religion, stupid. Everywhere Islam goes, inbreeding increases and society becomes worse. Wherever Christianity goes, inbreeding decreases, so societies do better in almost every material way. Here's another interesting point that Wilson made. A very important point and consequence we must be aware of. With low IQs, so collectively low and developmentally challenged, the dangers to the West is what is called the force doctrine. Men grant women rights. Think about that. Islam must literally bank on the benevolence of Christians to not wipe them off the face of the planet. This is the reason why Islam is such a threat. They're going to come into Western countries, build mosques, and then use brute force. And the Democrat left is all too happy to help them because they see it as their avenue to permanent power. Islam is not compatible with Western culture. Here's one of hundreds of reasons Muslims and Islam is incompatible with the Western culture. A beautiful teenage girl was tied, gagged, dumped, and drowned in what Dutch prosecutors called a brutal honor killing. Look at this beautiful 18-year-old girl, Raya Najjar, 18, was allegedly murdered by her brothers on orders from their father for shaming the family by having a boyfriend and embracing a more Western lifestyle. You see, it's not compatible with Western civilization. So in the famous words of one of my favorite people of all time, Dr. R.C. Sproul, at a convention when he was asked a really stupid question, he says, "What's wrong with you people?" and that went viral. But that's what I want to scream so often, is when you don't get it, when it's so clear as to the danger in front of you. What's wrong with you people? What's wrong with this country? What's wrong with the Democrat left? And what's wrong with the people on the right side of the political spectrum who basically just sit around and tolerate it all? So I ask, what is wrong with us? Is there a suicide virus going around in the West? No, it is an evil presence, an evil people that too many of us tolerate, and they are concentrated in the Democrat left, particularly in this country. They cannot speak the truth. They cannot recognize the truth, cannot comport their lives and decision-making attached to reality. They are a danger to themselves and the rest of us. They depend upon a simple-minded and essentially morons to stay in power, and this is where the democracy fails. You cannot let enemies of freedom and civil society vote. I will have another installation on Islam in the weeks to come, and that I call it Islam 2.0. But for now, I want to get to some other current news, and we'll pick up later on the Islam problem. Now, here's some bad news, and it came from Montana Senator Sheehy in a Fox News interview. And he said that the Chinese military has already surpassed the United States. Seriously? This is an outrage. Who's responsible? All of us who want cheap goods from China have done this to ourselves. We finance the building of the Chinese military just like we finance the building of all those glittery buildings in the Middle East. When did we ever think it wise to do business with our enemies? Back in the early days of Russian communism, they said that the capitalist will make the rope they hang us with. You need to pick up your phone right now, and that is all of you over the 46 states that we cover in this podcast, and let them know you expect them to provide you in this country with a military second to none. Now, here's another outrage. We made this monster, and in 20 years, because of our greed, we turned a third world enemy, that's China, into a superpower. After this podcast, you need to call your representatives and senators in D.C. and express your outrage as to how they have, in their neglect, allowed our enemy, the world's enemy for that matter, to surpass us in military strength. So now, moving on to other topics in the news, I want you to watch this short clip of a Democrat legislator in Kentucky, which reportedly has had over 20 million hits, and this female legislator was so extreme. It's unbelievable. It even got the attention of Elon Musk, who called her an evil woman. Here it is, and listen to this.
I think we're missing an incredible opportunity right now. I'm going to be honest. I don't feel good about being white every day for a lot of reasons. Because it's a point of privilege that I get to move through the world in a way that so many of my other colleagues and friends and family members of the community don't get the privilege to do. And I'm just a female, but just a woman, just a white woman. If I was a white man, I would be functioning from a point of an even greater privilege. I think we're missing an opportunity when kids have a moment to reflect about how the color of their skin does and does not allow them to move through the world. Running to them and trying to stifle that and trying to say you shouldn't feel bad, so we don't want to ever expose you to something that is going to make you have to pause and have maybe some internal feelings. It's a missed opportunity for some really good dialogue. It's not about making people feel bad about being white. I think it's about acknowledging the historical privilege that white people have always had in this country, which I don't know that anybody in this room in good conscience could argue exists and still exists.
These are the kind of people we find in our classrooms and in teachers' unions that are warping the minds of our children, that will render us defenseless against the Islamic hordes that have come into our country, particularly thanks to President Biden. Miss Stalker here is a self-loathing, sanctimonious, medicating psychotic. She displays a false empathy over a false problem that she and her other Democrat colleagues are so good at creating. As I have often mentioned, the Democrats are great at creating false narratives and problems for which money must be thrown at, and the Republicans are great at manufacturing excuses as to why they can't stop the Democrats. But getting back to Ms. Stalker, who is stalking our children, and after all, that's exactly what it's all about, isn't it? If you remember anything from history, you should remember that dictator Lenin of Russia said, "Give me a child until he's 5, and the seeds that I plant will never be uprooted." You see, folks, it's always been about the kids, and you were supposed to be their protector. Yet we have paid and allowed them to be mentally abused by these pathological narcissists in our schools. But I don't want to get off too much on a rabbit's track here. I just want to keep the facts on this classic example of a psychotic Democrat, and it's right here in Kentucky. If Ms. Stalker is so ashamed of being white, then I suggest she tell us what steps she's taken to do anything about it in her life, and in the first place. And secondly, she needs to resign her seat and give someone of another color the opportunity to take her position. Stalker is the epitome of the liberal white woman who is bringing down Western society, much like Angela Merkel did in Germany, with her open border policies that has essentially turned Germany Islamic. Here's another Democrat for you who calls America the Great Satan, repeating the Islamic leader Khomeini. Imagine this. You should remember this representative, Hank Johnson from Georgia, who actually thought that islands floated. That's no joke. It's on videotape. It went viral and on the internet. And it was filmed when he was questioning one of our military leaders in Congress. He was concerned about adding a few more troops to Guam for fear that the island would capsize. Mr. Johnson now wants to weaken America's military defense because we are defending ourselves from narco-terrorists and blowing up their boats in the water in the Caribbean and keeping drugs out of this country. And he says this just right after it was reported that China had surpassed us militarily. Johnson called America the great bully, just like a Democrat. They hate America. Now here is a good one for my Kentucky listeners. On Tuesday's broadcast of CNN's Laura Coates Live, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, our radical Nancy Pelosi-style governor here in Kentucky, said that we used to say that a president can't impact the economy that much, but now we know that isn't true because the state of the economy now under President Donald Trump. That's a quote from our governor who wants to run for president. Well, shame on Kentucky for having voted him into office. That just goes to show you how much they know about politics. You give them a familiar name and the brain just turns off and the fingers push the Democrat button. Although Kentucky is a deep red state, we do have these mental lapses, and of course, the Libertarian Party made Bashear governor by taking 26,000 votes away from Republicans during the election. Now we have, unfortunately, foisted this Nancy Pelosi-style governor upon the rest of the country. Thanks, Kentuckians. This is being threatened by this potential candidate for president. In other podcasts and writings, I have listed all of this guy's frauds and lies. The only reason for any of his popularity in the state is because we have a Republican supermajorities in the legislature. In fact, on all the major successes that we've had in Kentucky, Bashear vetoed the legislation that made Kentucky successful in those areas, those policy areas. And now we have Bashear boasting about how he has done such a good job as governor. He hasn't. He's a liar. He's a pathological liar. And in some of my writings, I've listed his lies. He's been overridden more times than in all the governors in Kentucky's history combined. So to Kentuckians and to the rest of the nation, don't let that boyish look fool you. Behind the scenes, he is a wretched and morally rudderless person. He's a politico caught up in dreams of grandeur. One thing that Bashear didn't answer in his CNN interview was, if the president can have that much effect on the economy, what's his excuse for the man he so loved and supported in President Biden, who gave us the highest inflation rate in 40 years? Remember this, folks, when prices go up under inflation, they don't necessarily come down as inflation comes down. Don't blame Trump. You now are just going to have to suffer through the tough times as Trump works to undo the damage that Biden did. Inflation and price increases that result are much like taxes. Once you vote a tax in, you almost never get rid of it. So President Trump is having to deal with the consequences of the man many voted into office back in 2020 and his policies. I keep telling you, Democrats don't deliver you anything but misery, and they don't have any good ideas. They rape you of your income and wealth and give it out to their special interest groups like the Somalis in Minnesota that basically kept the Democrats in Minnesota in power. And Minnesota has 10 electoral votes. Then you have those special interest groups like the LGBTQ community, drag queens, the criminal aliens who crossed our border in the millions under Biden, the Islamic communities who have set up little separate nations inside our borders, and the touchy-feely radical left white hippie women of the 60s. But for them, no Democrat would have been elected president since John F. Kennedy. Now here's another good one for you. You see, there is no difference among these Democrats. They hate America. Just this week, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a bill that prevents U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents from arresting illegal aliens outside of or near courthouses in that state. Folks, if I were Attorney General, I would be bringing charges against this overfed billionaire leftist Democrat. I know that's redundant. Arrest him and put him on trial for the obstruction of justice by impeding federal law enforcement. Remember, there are thousands of criminal aliens in this state and in his state, well, frankly, over the whole country, but particularly in his state and in Chicago. And get this, that can travel anywhere in the United States. And remember this, remember that radical Muslim that traveled? He drove from Washington State across the country to shoot those 2 National Guards in Washington, D.C., one of which died of her wounds, and she was only 20 years old. The enemy combatants, which are the Democrats, are in this country. And to be brutally honest with you folks, you just might be one of the next victims if you sit on your butts and do nothing and that you vote Democrats or give aid and comfort to those around you who do. If we lose this nation, and we are on the verge of it because Trump can only do so much as one man, that may very well be on the backs of Americans who sat back and did nothing. Okay, well, you've heard me often say I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. Well, on Tuesday on Fox News Channel's America Reports, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky said President Donald Trump had to come ask permission from Congress to go to war with Venezuela. Now, many of you know that Rand Paul is my senator from Kentucky. We've been friends, and I was one of his earliest supporters. But he's given me more than a lot of heartburn in his dealings with Trump, but also in an overall sense of what really works in the game of politics and political chess. Now, I can just hear some of his staff and ardent supporters defend him, saying, well, he was smart enough in the game of political chess to get elected. Well, I'm not going to let anybody get by with that because he coasted on a lot of his father's fame and his father's name recognition. And number 2, early supporters like me. Now, for Rand to ask the president to come to Congress for permission on anything, and particularly defending the country from foreign enemies, is an act of futility. Such a thing is what I call dead on arrival. Come on, Rand. You know you can't get anything done in Congress. Congress has become so dysfunctional that it can never do anything timely, and over the last 100 years, the country has had to depend more and more on executive orders from the president in order for anything important to get done in this country on a timely fashion. So here you are, Rand, wanting to spend months, if not years, letting Venezuelan drug boats infest our country with drugs, killing thousands of Americans, while you endlessly debate whether Trump should be killing drug cartel members. Seriously, Rand? You and I and the rest of the country have a big enough problem with the largest drug cartel in the world, and that's called the Democrat left, who shields and protects the South American cartels. So you certainly don't need to be impeding the president in doing things that need to be done timely. You and I both know that your proposal only serves as a talking point for the Democrats. That is what I call aiding and abetting the enemy, because the Democrat Party is the enemy of America. And when it comes time for your reelection, you will certainly rue the day that you ever took any position that helped the Democrat left. Wise up. My goodness, the people on my side of the fence sometimes are the most inane and obtuse people I've ever known. So yes, I am an equal opportunity criticizer, and when a Republican gets out of line, they're going to hear from me. Well, here's more proof of what I've been calling Civil War 2.0. And it's well underway, folks. More than 80% of Somali-headed refugee households in the state of Minnesota are on one or more forms of American taxpayer-funded welfare, according to new data published by the Center for Immigration Studies. Look at these numbers. This is in part the reason why no Republican can win a presidential election in Minnesota, that is. It's by design to permanently lock in the Democrat left in power permanently. To make matters worse, Minnesota Democrat Governor Tim Walz earned a standing ovation at a recent party fundraiser in Seattle when he promised to bring even more fraud-prone Somali migrants to his state. Yeah, he wants to bring more in. How appropriate for this kind of announcement to be made in, of all places, Seattle, Washington, another dysfunctional hotbed of anti-American radical leftists. Remember, it has just been discovered that over $1 billion of fraud in Minnesota took place and basically at the hands of Walz, where the Somali community stole that money. Yes, your tax dollars, and millions of that went to Islamic terrorists in Somalia. How many times do I have to repeat myself with the abundant evidence staring us in the face that the Democrat left is a threat to this nation? Just think about it. They want more welfare recipients brought to this country so you can pay for them. Folks, they do not add to the fabric of this country or the culture of this country. They have no skills. They are basic bottom line laborers, and they have to live off of substance and certain benefits that we give them, all at taxpayer expense. They are only here because they will be a Democrat voter. For a society like ours to be so blind to the suicide they are committing has to be a divine judgment. This is like Rome all over again just before the barbarians sacked Rome. The enemy is here, and their army is in the millions of immigrants who the Democrats have opened our borders to. These immigrants have no clue as to the nature of the American Republic and the culture, and they will destroy it just as they did the country from which they came. Moreover, to Christians out there, the great majority of the Democrats today are atheists. They despise you. They want to break your hold on this country. You are being diluted with the import of all these Islamists. Wake up, folks. Take this message to everyone that you know, your family and your friends. Okay, well, that is more than enough news and information for today. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to check out bluegrasschronicles.com, where you'll find other articles, podcasts, in the archives, in books, and so forth. So until next time, I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.